rich history of this place owes much to its geographical location. Located in the borderlands, the gateway from the Carpathian mountains to the lowland plains, on the navigable Sand River, which of course created great trade opportunities. And that is why this town, Przemyśl, grew up. I'm standing here in the market square in Przemyśl at the beginning of our journey, a journey through history which takes us from the end of the Roman Empire to the end of the Second World War, a rich history of people, of buildings, of institutions. Join me on Poland Daily History as we see Przemyśl above ground and below ground. Karol, when we were at the castle earlier on, we sort of took the story of Przemyśl to the end of the 15th century. I wonder if you could give us an overview of the developments in Przemyśl in historical terms during the 16th and 17th centuries.
Historia Przemyśla w wieku XVI-XVII jest to taki tak zwany złoty okres miasta.
The history of Przemyśl in the 16th and 17th centuries is the so-called golden age of the city. It was the first time the city actually expanded. It can be observed very well on the example of the market square. It is a unique square, which I would lie if I were to say was the only slanted square in Europe, since it isn't, but it is still worth stressing its uniqueness. All the tenement houses which are located here, the so-called frontage construction, for example the northern or southeastern frontages, were built during the golden age of the 16th and 17th centuries. It was so due to the flow of rich merchants who came to Przemyśl and built these tenement houses. It is worth adding that such buildings had to have evacuation routes for its residents especially. That's why there are underground basement passages under the square, which reach even 9 meters below ground.
Płytą rynku ciągnie się podziemny taki system przejść piwniczych, do których można wejść czasami nawet na głębokość 9 metrów. Gdyby wszystkie połączyć te piwnice, naprawdę mielibyśmy przepiękną trasę tutaj taką właśnie spacerową.
If all these basements were to be connected, they would create a beautiful tunnel system, which would be ideal for tourists' walking routes. It all came from the golden era of the 16th and 17th centuries. Of course, the 16th and especially the 17th century marked the boom of religious infrastructure. Apart from the aforementioned Carmelite Church, we can remind the story of the old post-Jesuit church, today a Greek Catholic archcathedral, which was constructed in the 17th century for the Jesuits. The Jesuits have some dark pages in the history of Przemyśl, as they were responsible, for instance, for the burning of the St. Peter's and Paul's Church, which was built all the way back in the 13th century, as well as they stormed the old synagogue. If we are talking about a multicultural city, we can focus on the synagogues for a bit. The city of Przemyśl had 4 synagogues, and the first one was built precisely in the 16th century, between 1592 and 1596. While we are at the old synagogue, we should also mention the old cemetery. Unfortunately, it no longer serves as a Jewish nor Catholic cemetery. The only thing that remains is the main gate. Sadly, the Germans completely destroyed it during the war, and all the matzevas were taken away by them, for instance to fortify and repair roads. Going back, the 16th and 17th century was the time when the population of Przemyśl grew substantially. As a result, new defense walls were built to protect the growing population against attacks of any sort. Previously, there were also defense embankments, but between the 15th and 17th centuries, the fortifications were much improved. It is hard not to praise the strategic value of the city of Przemyśl when it comes to its location. It It has been often colloquially said that in Przemyśl you always need to go up the hill. So no matter where we put defense structures, they would make the access to the city more difficult, just like in the case of the walls.
Miejskich zawsze będzie to utrudniony dostęp do na przykład samego miasta.
And also take into account the geographical position of Przemyśl. Obviously, it's in a great position for trade. And I was wondering in the 16th and 17th century, because all these magnificent buildings, including the religious buildings, had to be paid for by somebody. So I was wondering if you could say a little about what was the source, what were the main industries in Przemyśl in that period, and what were the main sources of wealth for the city.
Przede wszystkim Przemyśl był ważnym szlakiem handlowym, szlakiem takim wymiennym.
First and foremost, Przemyśl was an important trade spot already in the earlier centuries, but it was in the 16th and 17th century when it became even more important. One of the most valuable resources was salt, which was easily stored in the underground basements under the tenement houses. However, there was a dark side to it as well, unfortunately. These rich tenement house owners had many servants who were often made to reside in the very same basements. Like I said, it is the more unpleasant side, but I think it is worth telling. But as I just mentioned, the main import product that came to Przemyśl was salt. It would be difficult to pinpoint the main export resource from Przemyśl, but one that could come to mind would be limestone, which was burned in a village located a few dozen kilometers from the city center, which had a special furnace just for that purpose. So limestone was one of the main export products at the time.
The main export destinations presumably would be Ukraine, because that's very close by, and other parts of Poland as well. If salt, for example, was coming from Kraków.
Kraków był takim bardzo.
Yes, Krakow was one of the main trade cities too.
Taki handel wymienny.
Okay, that makes sense, because you normally trade. To bring it up to the current times, think about Brexit, but that's another issue. You normally trade with those countries which are closest to you, unless you have strange ideas, which some people seem to. But and so really, we can say that in the 16th and 17th century, the Przemyśl was really a rather comfortable, sort of relatively wealthy, relatively peaceful, or we'll hear about that later, city. And there were no major problems. This was a sort of golden age for Poland generally, in the period until we get to at least the events leading to the first partition, 100 years later. But so I think in summary, you're saying the 15th and 16th century was a period of relative prosperity for the city, a period when we could create new buildings. Yeah. Everybody was generally, in as much as they were in the 16th and 17th century, sort of quite happy. You think that's a fair summary?
Można tak powiedzieć, że faktycznie ten wiek XVI-XVII.
We could say that the period between the 16th and 17th century made life quite pleasant for the citizens of Przemyśl. It is not like it was the richest city of all, but definitely functioned well.
Spokojnie myślę funkcjonować.
Yes, generally a sort of mini golden age. Yeah. Folk blissfully unaware, of course, of the events of the 18th century. And they could look forward to life continue as it did in this marvelous location. I mean, as you look around and you can see the potential. You look over there. As I look over there, and I'm looking into the Ukraine, and then obviously on the journey on the road to Lvov behind me, of course, the road from Kraków, the mountains over there. A marvelous place, and you really sense it here. This sense of history in this great location. Of course, we haven't mentioned, but there's a river running through it as well. And was there much riverborne trade?
Rzeka też była oczywiście wykorzystywana, ale dopiero w późniejszych okresach.
The river was also used for trade, but not fully until much later. The River San, which passes through Przemyśl, starts in the Bieszczady Mountains and has a little branching river called Wiar, wasn't really that important for trade until the later centuries. In the 16th, 17th century, it was used for crossing the river, but it became important later.
More later. Yeah, I think yes, the river communications from a trading sense, I think in many parts of Europe tended to come a little later. But that's great.